could probably write a list of your characters that you're planning on creating in your story? Thumbs
Yes.
up? Okay, we ready to move on? Okay, now we're going to talk about the setting, which is the place and the time the story takes place. Now, when we say place, we're talking about where the story starts. We're all going on a trip in our story. So this isn't where you're going to end up. This is where you're starting, okay? So I want you to think about a story that you've recently read, or a TV show that you watched, or a place where you recently were. Since Jessica hasn't read any books or watched TV and only talked to her mother within the last 24 hours, we're going to just think about somewhere we are. And I want you to think of a setting that you could tell me that would really describe what a setting is. Turn and talk.
This classroom, the class, or the car, or in Cinderella, they're in the castle.
That's where they start though, right? So she's in
Her
in
room,
her room, or
the house.
or her stepmother's house.
Who wants to share
Yeah.
something? Yes, ma'am.
So we're talking about Cinderella
Mhm.
and where that starts in either in her stepmother's house or more specifically in her room.
Okay,
That's
so
where it
in
starts off.
Cinderella, we have in her room, her house.
And you were in your house with your mom.
Anything
yeah.
else?
I was in my apartment with my mom.
There you go. So that would be your setting, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now I want you to think for just a minute about these two things, the characters and the setting, just those two things. And I want you to think, what kind of a story would it be, or would we even be able to have a story if we didn't have these two elements? What would happen if they just weren't part of the story? Turn and talk.
There wouldn't be any focus.
There wouldn't be any there would be nothing to follow along with. There'd be no story. There'd be nothing to drive the story.
So who wants to share? Yes, ma'am.
There'd be no focal point because you wouldn't have anyone to follow. You wouldn't know what was important or wasn't important.
So what kind of story would it be?
Not a good one.
Yeah, not a good one. Could you really even have a story that didn't take place anywhere? No, so you've got to have a place. So don't you think in our stories that we're writing, we're going to have a place. And we're definitely going to have characters, right? And we're going to have it in a place. So in my story that I'm doing, my trip story that I'm writing just like y'all, what do you think is my setting? Yes, ma'am.
Car.
Okay, I could start the story in the car. Where's somewhere else I could start the story?
Your house.
Because it's the beginning of the trip. The house, right?
Your home.
Right, exactly. The house, in the car. And you know what? You can use lots of prepositional phrases to just keep going with that. In the car, on the ladder, in the closet, in the bathroom, on the roof. And that's lots of places to describe where you're going to be and who. So now we know who's in the story and where it's going to start, right? So we've got kind of a good foundation for our story here. We could probably even start writing something here, except we have no what? No story, right? So we're going to talk about plot, okay? So I want you to think about, again, a story that you've read recently, or a TV show that you've watched, or a video series that you really, really like and are trying to get one of your friends to watch that has a really good plot. Okay, turn and talk.
Yes. Anything. I looked at Fianna's Place, actually. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book. No, it's an interesting book. The plot is introduced through how What do you think? I guess we could go with Cinderella. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so they start off and tell you that, her family's not nice and she doesn't take care of them.
Yeah, I like that. We'll continue
So I was
Cinderella.
listening and I heard Jessica had the really good, what were you talking about?
Well, I actually remember, I read this recently, it just popped in my head, but this children's book, Fiona's Place, how it starts in Ireland and they need to go to America.
So she's going on a trip also,
Mhm.
just like what we're riding.
Yeah, that's
Well,
what
that's
it
wonderful,
reminded
so
me of.
she's going on a trip, just like ours. You'll learn when you get older that a trip, going somewhere is one of the main foundations for lots of stories. It's called a journey. Okay? And we're going to start with a little smaller and just get older and they get bigger. Okay? Going on a trip, and did you want to talk about Cinderella?
Well, they just tell you how she has to take care of her family and they're not very nice and she does it, but she doesn't really, I don't think she wants to.
You get to see how her life is. Right? Okay. You get to view life. Okay. So let's think about this a second. So we have the character set up and the setting set up for my trip, okay? And I really hope that when we're going over this, you're kind of thinking in the back of your head, I have these things in my story, and I can write them down too, because that's what you're going to be doing in a minute. First, who wants, well, let's do it this way. I want you to think, what would you think the plot of my story is going to be? And it's going to be really, really similar to what you're going to write also. Okay, so turn and talk.
I'm on a trip.
Yes.
Who
Going
wants
on
to
a
share
trip,
with the
going on an
class?
adventure on a trip.
Who wants to share with the class? Yes, Miss Victoria.
Going on a trip.
Going on a trip. There we go. And since mine is going to San Antonio, we're going on a trip to San Antonio. Right? Because you can keep going on that. In fact, the more details you give to it, the longer your story is going to be and the better your story is going to be. Okay? But we're doing a short story where we just make sure we have these things. What do you think? I want you to think, what do you think a story would be like without a plot? Turn and talk.
Be non-existent.
Or
Or boring.
It would exist, it would just exist in eternity. It would just continue because there's no point, no direction.
Who has an idea they want to share?
We discussed that there'd be no direction, there'd be no interesting anything happening.
Nothing would really happen, would it? In fact, wouldn't it really just be a list? Like we could list off the characters like we have here, we could list off the setting, and without this, that's all it would be. There's nothing to tie these things together, so the plot is really the meat of the story, okay? So the last thing that the author does in the beginning of the story is create interest. And this gets really difficult for people, especially when they're trying to write as they get older, because they think this is really, really hard, but it's not hard. This is simply something for a reason you're writing, okay? And the reason that I put it on a train and it's in the engine is because this is where the author pulls the reader into the story, just like the engine pulls the train, okay? So I want you to think of a story that you've read or seen recently, that you can think of something that the author did, something that happened that made it really create interest to you. And then I'm going to outline how you can do that in your stories really easily, okay? So think to yourself, I have some examples, and turn and talk.
What about your book?
Well, I was actually thinking of Cinderella,
Okay.
since that was the continuing theme. I guess in that literary interest through Cinderella kind of for me, I guess, she was kind of like very dreamy, like she would have like dreams or whatever, wanting more, or how she was treated, by her stepsisters and stepmom. That was also kind of what we would.
Yeah, and they also made it interesting and made you want to learn because she also talked to the animals and stuff, and that's not normal. So we'll see where that was going maybe.
I like
So
that.
you want to share an idea?
So,
Yes, ma'am.
so we kind of discussed how we were talking about continuing with Cinderella, since we both know that story, that she had started off with some wishes or dreams or whatever, and
Okay.
then also, like, there were talking animals, which is an ordinary.
So she had wishes and dreams. You want to know if those are going to come true.
Mm-hmm.
They're left open. And the talking animals, you want to know why she gets to talk to animals, right? Because not everybody gets to talk to animals. Those are really good examples, actually. Well, the one for your story is going to be a little simpler, okay? Because a lot of times when we take a trip, and I mean, you could write about going to the grocery store, you could write about coming to school one day, and a lot of times you're thinking, well, I don't know what to put in there to create interest, okay? Now, remember what I told you about my trip to San Antonio? What was my one big reason for wanting to go to San Antonio? Does anybody remember? It's okay if you don't. Does anybody want to guess? We're here to make mistakes.
Is it Alamo?
To see the Alamo. That's exactly right. I was so excited to see the Alamo. So what I'm going to write about to create interest in my story is that I wanted to see the Alamo. Because if you're reading it, you read that there's these people and they're at home, but they're going on a trip to San Antonio, and he wants to see the Alamo. Don't you kind of want to know if I actually get to see the Alamo or not? So see, in your stories, you can do the same thing. You just put something you're excited about going to see. It can be as simple as because you really love your grandmother, if you're going to see your grandmother. That means that people are going to want to read it because they're going to want to see what your grandmother's like when you actually get there. Because you've said you're going because you love her. They want to meet her through the book, okay? So what do you think a story would be like if we didn't create any kind of interest, if the author just left this part out? It's obvious we could still have a story, right? But I want you to think about what kind of story it would be if you didn't have a situation that created interest. And think about that to yourself. Okay, now turn and talk.
It wouldn't be
Boring.
goal oriented. It would just be kind of boring. Yeah, I agree.
So who wants to share?
It'd be boring.
Be boring. You probably wouldn't want to read that story, would you? And if we're going to write stories, we want people to want to read them, you know? And we want to write a reason that we're reading them. So when we go back and read them, we know why we wrote it, right? Okay? All right. So now look at your journal sheet again, all right? So I want you to read the closing text to yourself and give you a thumbs up when you're done. Okay. Now, take turns reading the closing task to your turn and talk partner, volume level 1.
I will write the characters, the setting, and the plot to my trip story.
I will write the characters, the setting, and the plot to my trip story.
Okay. Now, does everybody understand what I'm asking you to do here? Do you see how it's exactly what Mr. Caldwell's done here on the board? Is this something everybody thinks that they can do with their My Trip story?
Yes.
Because we remember, writing is a process, and it's really important that we do this building block, because as we do them, it makes writing the story really easy at the end, okay? Okay, begin. And that's it.